set up a Lambda function. Let's do that. And remember, the whole point is, we can do this like pay-as-you-go model, right? Where we don't have to have our EC2 machine always running, but rather like as a response to an event, where the event could be someone hitting our server, like in a HTTP request, or getting an event like someone uploading a file to S3, etc. So we'll create this like sample function. It's the name. The runtime, we'll use Python. Like I said, for right now, this doesn't really matter. It's like the chip, right? Like what kind of machine will our Lambda function use? What chip will that be? This stuff we won't use either. The default execution role, we saw that before, that we can use, create a role so that like our function has access to S3 to say like listen for specific events, like uploading an object to an S3 bucket. But for this, we don't need it actually right now. So we'll just do create function, and it's going to use a role with basic Lambda permissions. Cool. So we have our Lambda function. From here, we can you can see that it gives us some sample code to use. As I mentioned before, right, you can add more and more to this, and we can also trigger this, right? Like remember, this thing's going to basically be invoked. Like it'll be Lambda handler, and then parentheses the event and some context. So you're gonna like call this and pass through an event, All right. So we can let's just JSON.dump. I don't even know if we need the JSON.dumps, but we'll just JSON.dumps the event. All right, and then we can return that. And this is something I guess to be careful of, like you want to make sure this is probably in this format, that your return value is staying consistent. We can create a test event, if you want. So we can configure this, create a new event, call sample, and then just put whatever. We have test and then hello. So that's fine. All right, and then save it. And then we should probably deploy this if we want anyone to actually, want these changes to take effect. So all here it's saying is the test event was saved, but that doesn't mean our updates here were actually deployed. So let's click deployed. You also see that nice little gray box that said changes not deployed over here, and now it says successfully updated the function. And now we can finally trigger it, right? Click on test. We got the response. The body is my event, right? And then you can see it, I guess, logged. If you want to see any like really log some stuff or whatever, right, you can just use a print statement, with some information, something like that. And then in terms of like monitoring this, so there are all these different panels, right? And there is this monitor one. This one is not always up to date. So just note that, like if you look at the CloudWatch logs here, it looks like it's not there. So just go up and then click on View CloudWatch Logs. CloudWatch is a service for logging like any of your services, but you can see it's filtering for this specific function, this resource, right? And then you scroll down and you can see, okay, here's where it was called, right? And here now you can click on it to see more details. Okay. So this is what we did essentially yesterday, right? Cool. So the next thing then is, so, kind of like we want to get into this feature where, let's say like every day we want to maybe, we're like using our Texas Strings API, maybe like every day we want to hit that API, all right? Or maybe like every hour, something like that. So for that, whereas previously we were having like uploading some data to S3, like that would trigger it. But what if we want to like trigger calling, maybe we have a request in the code, you can imagine we have something like import requests, and then we do something like, requests.get and call the API here, some API, and then we like get the response and write it to S3, right? So maybe we want to do that like every day, or scrape a website, anything. So for that, we can use something called like EventBridge, okay? So EventBridge is like this. You can look it up. You can just find it by going to EventBridge. And it is like, they keep on adding features, which kind of makes things, it's just like a little bit of overlap between all these different services. We're really just going to be using this rule thing, but you can explore. There are these things called pipes, an EventBridge schedule. I actually don't even know what this one is, the schema registry. But, it's a growing, I guess they keep adding more stuff every year to it seems like. So what we'll do is we'll create a new rule, and this rule will run on a schedule, and it will basically send an event to our Lambda function, right? It will add, and then when the Lambda function hears that event, it will run, okay? So previously the event was someone uploading a file to S3. In this case, what we can do is just, kind of create an event. It can, tell it to run every hour, right? And that will get sent to my Lambda function and invoke it, right? And call the Lambda function. And you can kind of see that, like, that's what's always kind of, this is what my diagram of that is. We'll create this EventBridge. This probably should say like rule, and say like every minute send an event object to the Lambda function, and then it should run at that point. So in terms of how to do that, I'm gonna have to look at my notes. So here's the first thing. We can use the command line to do this. You can also do this if you want through, you can create a rule here and do that, and do create rule. But I think it's easier if you just can kind of like follow along with the command line. All right, so this is AWS Events, put rule, right? We'll name the rule, and then we'll say how often we want the event to be created. Okay, so let's put this in my command line. So remember, I just have access to AWS, right? As long as we do that AWS configure, and then I can just literally paste that in there. So this is the event service. We're going to add a new rule, give it a name, and tell it how often it's going to run. So press return here, and this is creating this. So this response is the rule Amazon resource number. So this is telling you, hey, this is what I just created, and then you can take a look at that. I should be able to refresh here, and now I can see that. Right now, this is just the name. Run each minute. What actually has it run each minute is that schedule expression rate 1 minute. So let's click on it, make sure that was set, and it looks like it was, right? Fixed rate of 1 minute. By the way, I'm just reminding myself now to delete this right when I finish, the lecture. I'll do it at the end of the lecture so you can all see what you have to do to delete it. Okay, so we have this event set. Notice if you look at the target of the event, so it's like, we're triggering this event, but we want it to go to the Lambda function. This would be the target. And right now there is no target of this event. And the event is just picture like a JSON object. It's just being filtered through Amazon to the right resource. So the next thing, so in order to do this, there's two things I guess we'll have to do. The first thing is we're going to have to add a permission. This will be a resource policy to my Lambda function, saying that we will allow events, right? I'm going to allow events to be sent to my Lambda function, so long as they come from that specific event rule, okay? So what I'll need to do, so I can basically copy and paste this into AWS, and I'll show you it in the console in a second. But what I'll need to check is one, we're going to add a permission. This is going to be a resource permission, right? A resource policy. So I need to make sure I have the function name right. What am I what am I giving, saying we have access to? This says sample function. The action is the ability to invoke the function, right? The statement ID, this is just like a name for it. This actually can be anything. The principal says I'm going to allow events to invoke the function and this function. And then again, this source ARN, that I'm going to have to make sure matches the rule over here. So here's the event bus, here's the rule ARN. I think that's what I want. So the rule ARN. You can also probably get it, yeah, you can get it here as well. Right, so we can just copy this. Just plug that in here. And now, that should be good. And I'll show you the results of this in a second. Oh, I broke it. Okay, function sample, function not found. Okay, so I think this is because it says when calling add permission, ARN lambda east1. I think it's complaining about this guy. Oh, maybe it's although this right here matches this. So maybe I have the wrong thing. Let me Command Z this. Invoke the function, source A event, ARN. This is the rule, right? And it's going to invoke this. I might have this name wrong. I just want to make sure I have. See this? It's a capital F. I bet you that's the issue. So sample capital F N. And then let's make sure this is right again. So I'm going to say I want to give permission of this rule to be able to, this event rule, to be able to hit my lambda function. So let's copy this and paste this into here. Yeah, that seems the same. Let's see if we do any better. Okay, that worked. So you can see what this did. This generated, remember all that stuff, like it generated our JSON, the policy statement in JSON. So we use a command line function, but this is the equivalent of, like writing out the proper JSON to add a resource policy to our Lambda function. You can see this resource policy, like to understand this a little bit better. If we go to configuration and then permissions and scroll down, right here it is. So we gave this statement ID of scheduled event. So that's right here. And then if you click on, view policy, this is that JSON that we always see. Okay? So this is saying, this is on my Lambda function, saying that I'm going to allow events from, from the event service the ability to invoke, right, to call my Lambda function to basically trigger it, as long as it comes from this, on this resource, as long as it comes from this this rule. All right. So this is right, the bouncer that's now my event rule is on the list, right, of the bouncer standing in front of my Lambda function. Cool. Okay, so this was just permission. So far, all we did, if you think about it, was we let the bouncer know, let this event come through, and also we created a rule saying run each minute, but we still do not have a target, right? Saying send, hey, event, call it every minute, but we want to say send the event to my Lambda function, and once it gets there, this resource policy will say, okay, let the event through and allow it to be triggered. So yeah, that's the next thing. We need to actually add the target, right, over to the event. To do that, you can see how I do this. I create this targets.json file. All it is literally just you touch targets.json, and then in there, you're going to say, where do you want to send this thing? So let's make sure we call it the right thing. We're going to send it to this Lambda function. So let's go over to the Lambda function. I can probably, and here it is, copy ARN. So let's copy that, and I'll just paste that here. Okay, and what is this? This is the event that you're sending over there. So you can put whatever you want here. And so now, once I do this, what I'm gonna have to do to actually like associate this guy is run the next thing, which I have over here, which is this. The AWS event puts target on the rule run each minute, and then here I'm specifying the file, right? So that's going to like basically associate this with my run each minute rule, right? And this says send this kind of event object over to this Lambda function. So let's run that, and that will be it. Okay. Okay, I think that's fine. Let's take a look. So run each minute, that file. The file is there. Let's go back to my rule and refresh. And do I see it? And there it is. Okay. So you can see now the target is this sample function. The other thing that's very like kind of nice from UI perspective is if you refresh this, feels like magic, right? So now this is, you can see that this is the trigger. Okay. So this should be working now. So if you click on like monitor every minute or so, and you do view CloudWatch logs every minute, you'll see this thing get kicked off. Okay. So yeah, that's 3:49, right? This was just kicked off 10 seconds ago, and like in another minute, we'll see it again. Now, right, as you kind of like, so these things are dangerous to like leave open. So let me show you, I guess before I move on, questions about what we did. I can, the reading will walk you through it, but essentially what you want to do is step 1, create the rule and say how often it runs. Step 2, add a resource policy to the Lambda function to let the rule through, right? To let the event through, right? So that is adding this thing under configuration. That's adding this guy. This is like my bouncer, right? That's going to let that event come through. And then step 3 is actually add the target to say like send the event over to the Lambda function. So for that, we created the targets.json file. Said this is what I want the target to be, is this Lambda function. This is the event I want, like the data I want you to send. It couldn't be anything, like, in this case it can be anything, but you can imagine maybe you want like the restaurant name, whatever, to get information about, if you want. And then we say target this rule to this rule, apply this target, right? The target laid out here. You can also see this is a list, so you could technically send like events to different Lambda functions, right? It'd be like, oh, this guy should know, and also this guy should know. But we don't need to do that. So then once you apply the target, then you'll see that if you go back to the Lambda function, to the rule, you'll see the target here. And then if you go to the Lambda function and you refresh, you'll see the target over here. And then finally, in CloudWatch, if I go to, actually that was probably the right things. It was this one, sample function. You can see that this is running, is it? Yeah, 48 and 49. So I think we're pretty good. Yeah, we should be pretty good. We can wait. So that's pretty good. All right, can the event bridge take input data from other AWS resources, pass them over to the target? In this case, we are sending the same data. Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of what we're doing. Take input data from other AWS resources and pass them over to the target. Like, that's kind of what we were doing when we were triggering the S3, having S3, right? take some data. You could like use. I think you can also like take data from your Lambda function and have it trigger another Lambda function. So you can do something like that. And then finally, there is this service that I actually don't know a ton about it, but called Pipes, which is also under EventBridge. And maybe you can like research, if you're interested, you can kind of research this. You can see that it says a pipe connects an event source to a target with optional filtering and enrichment. So enrichment is like adding additional data. You can imagine like querying a database. If I say get an event that like a customer came to this website, maybe I can then query a database to see like, oh, have we seen this customer from this region before? Like, what do we think we know about them? Blah, blah, right? So, and then add that information along in the JSON payload as we like send it to some other service, like maybe a recommendation engine or something like that. So anyway,
Hey Jeff,
this can be a little more complex.
yeah, I'm trying to understand the use case for this rule here. One use case is pretty clear, which is scheduled s- events being sent to the target, which is a Lambda in this case. That makes sense that we want to run the Lambda at a scheduled interval. But when it comes to sending the data is where I don't have much clarity. Like we can't change the data is what I'm trying to understand. So
Yeah, I mean, you can. It's true. I don't think. I mean, you can program like. I think you can probably. I mean, you can probably use the Lambda function itself to send an event. In which case that like maybe based on the output of hitting the API, right? Then that content can be in the event itself, right? Of like customer sign up, and now our customer visited this page, and then we found out the customer visited this page, and then we send that along in the event, or like, oh, this company is making too much money, or whatever. See if there's fraud. I don't know. And then you send so we hit an API, we get back some data, and then kind of like detect something from it, like it looks like potential fraud, and then we send that information along in the event. So we probably like this is one way with like scheduling that I'm guessing like it's not, you're right, it's pretty vanilla in terms of what information we're sending along with the event. But my guess is you can also send additional, you can like programmatically create an event and send it along, and then have different services that listen to it or are notified, say if there's some fraud or whatever and they want to take action.
that's, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of interesting, right? Kyle was saying data using data processing for this is common. Processing images, documents, clean data. So there's different ways you could do that, right? Like one would be, if you could do it, I guess on a schedule. You could also do it based on like the S3 event. That S3 trigger. In the case of like the S3 trigger, you could imagine processing, the data again, like looking for something specific that maybe you find, and then saying, "Hey, this file looks, we should take action with it, etc." Something like that. Just remember, like you have access to the Boto3 library with almost all these services, right? So you can typically use this stuff programmatically. Okay, let's delete everything. All right, so first, a couple things you need to delete. One, probably a good idea, delete the function, just in case. And then just because you delete the function doesn't mean that you deleted the event rule. So you're not done. You are not done. So go to the rule, click on this, and delete this too. Okay? At that point, you're done. All right? And then just to be sure, say you still had the function running, you could click on CloudWatch Monitor to your CloudWatch logs to make sure that you're not getting any, or it's not just continually calling, something like that. All right. So that's basically it. I didn't want to cover